Where are you guys in? Are you in Johannesburg right now?
No,
Oh,
Cape Town.
not Cape Town. Cape Town.
Yeah.
I was in Cape Town 2 years ago.
Oh,
It's so stunning. All I did was walk around. I I was just blown away by it.
I
I
wish
just,
I'd known.
yeah,
Next time, don't do that and not let me know.
We can show you all the best places.
I know I just found it fantastic. But I also really love Johannesburg. I've been there a couple of times.
Huh.
As strange and fascinating a place as Cape Town is beautiful.
Mm.
Johannesburg is weird and sort of fascinating. That
So,
was
Michael,
my.
where are we talking to you from?
I live about 2 hours north of New York City,
Okay, there we go.
a
Okay.
little town on the Hudson River.
Well, we are recording, so welcome, Malcolm Gladwell, to our Science and Sport podcast. We were talking off air just a few moments ago how it's taken us a long time to get this to happen. And I know that you know Ross because you've shared a couple of platforms where you guys discussed what the trans issue a while back. What was the story there between you and Malcolm on the
Well, Malcolm chaired a session at the Sloan Conference. That's a big event held every year at MIT in Boston. I think it was in 2022. I lose track of time, but he was the chairperson, and I was on a panel of three or four. I forget exactly how many, but
They
let's just say,
stacked the panel. They stacked
yeah.
the panel against you, Ross. They put a trans athlete and a trans advocate and you on the panel, and I was the moderator. And it was one of those strange situations where my suspicion is that 90% of the people in the audience were on your side, but 5% of the audience was willing to admit it.
My recollection of it is that everything I said was met with deathly silence, and everything the other two said got cheered.
Well, but the cheers were very, I mean, I think there was a hardcore of people who were ideologically committed to the position. But the idea that, I mean, there's many interesting things to say about that conversation. One was that it was a particular moment which has passed. If we did a replay of that exact panel at the Sloan Conference this coming March, it runs in exactly the opposite direction. And it would be, I suspect, near unanimity in the room that trans athletes have no place in the female category. I don't think there's any question. I just think it was a strange. I mean, I was the reason I'm ashamed of my performance at that panel because I share your position 100%, and I was cowed. The idea of saying anything on this issue, I was in a, I believe in retrospect, in a dishonest way. I was objective in a dishonest way. I let a lot of howlers pass without comment because I didn't. And I said to you in an email, there was that moment, remember, when, and I've forgotten her name. She's wonderful, sorry, I've forgotten their name. Um, a very, very thoughtful person. They were the trans athlete on the panel. And at one point, they turned to you, Ross, and they said, Ross, you have to let us win. And it was at that moment that I realized this position has gone, this argument has gone to the furthest extreme. What the trans movement is not asking for, they're not asking for, a place at the table. They're not asking for to be treated with respect and dignity. What they're asking is for no one to question the considerable physiological advantage they bring to the sport, and no one to question if they're going to win these races by 5 seconds, suck it up. That's what they were asking, right? In other words, if a really good Casta Semenya comes along who can run 147, what they're saying is you just have to so
Yeah.
so they win by 10 meters, so they win by 15. I mean, you would win by almost 100 meters, right?
Mm.
Mm.
They're in the 800. That what they're saying is you should have to live with that. And that
Yeah.
when I heard that, I was like, this is nuts. And yet I didn't say anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I would say that conversation was the first indications of where the argument was evolving to, because if that had happened to your point, if that was to happen next year, if that had happened a year before that, we would have been debating whether there even was male advantage. So by the time we sat on that stage in Boston, the evolution of the argument had already happened to the point that people like Joanna Harper and Katie Barnes were arguing that, hey, there might be male advantage, but that's fine. We just have to accept it. That's what I think came out there.
Yeah,
And
that's
Joanna
right.
Harper, for instance, had denied the existence of advantage, and by Boston had started to argue for it's not meaningful advantage. In other words, we can still have a competitive race. But you're exactly right. And okay, Caster Semenya is not trans, it's a DSD case, but it's still male advantage in women's sport. And we were just lucky that Semenya wasn't that athlete who could run a 146 800. Somewhere
Yeah.
there would be one who can. And actually, I used to often think, maybe even still do, we just need that person to come along. Leah Thomas did it for swimming. Good enough male to dominate in women's swimming. People
Mm.
go, oh, hang on. Emily Bridges in cycling, I think the same thing. But yeah, up to that point, it had been relatively mediocre males that had hidden the true problem that was about to hit sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you think,
Yeah.
Malcolm? Why do you think it's shifted then from that conference to what you think might happen this time? Where do you think the zeitgeist has taken us to get us to a more positive place in that respect?
Well, I think all of these arguments are embedded in larger social and cultural trends, right? This was never really an argument about sports. This was a much, much larger argument about a political argument, a cultural argument. And I think that those cultural winds uh, have have clearly shifted. That kind of I think a lot of this was also, I think in retrospect, we will look back on the COVID period as a period of profound cultural destabilization. I think we all went crazy. And I think, and for understandable reasons, it was a crazy period. And all kinds of, this was the moment when, there was just a kind of discontinuity that lasted for about 2.5, 3 years. And what we've done is, in some sense, we have returned to normal. So there's that. But there's also the point that Ross just made, which is it's just harder and harder and harder to make a naive argument about trans participation, right? The evidence is now mounting, so that even
Yeah.
the advocates are now having to shift their feet and make a different claim.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, and you'd know this, I'm sure, from all the debates and discussions you've been involved in, most people are really lousy at understanding a conceptual argument. They need to be smacked in the forehead with some factual thing that they can't avoid. And I think that's what happened. Because the arguments against trans women in women's sport had existed long before, but people needed cases. They needed a picture. They needed an example of it to happen. And those examples became more and more and more frequent.
Yeah.
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 The other thing I would say is this is a classic case, by the way, of um, people like you and I. Um, I think we made a little bit of an error based on the fact that we were overly focused on elite sport and the consequences of this for elite sport. But the reason opinion has shifted has nothing to do with elite sport. It has to do with parents who've got kids, in their on their high school swim team, who are
Mm,
thinking, either observing, actually having it to them, or reading about a trans athlete joining the women's team and realizing, oh my God, that just means my daughter has to compete against a biological male. That's what
Yeah.
that's what changed it. It had nothing to do with Leah Thomas, nothing to do with all these high profile cases. It had to do with, in there was a couple of cases in Connecticut, not far from where I live. That's what changed. It's like you would see these pictures of
mm,
someone who looked, completely different from everyone in a 100-meter race in the, high school state championships, and they will be leading by 6 meters. And you just realize that's what's changing. There's a parent in the stands of one of those girls in the race who's just saying, what is going on here?
mm.
That's why it's unsustainable, right? Because those parents are not going to put up with this sort of bullshit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So, Malcolm, I mean, I think for many people out there in podcast world, they will know you as an author, and your books, of course, as we have introed to this podcast, are world famous. I've read a few of them. I'm in the middle of reading Talking to Strangers at the moment. But I think a lot of people don't understand or don't realize that your passion for sport goes back many, many years. And it
Mhm.
starts off, of course, when you were a youngster and competing in the 1500 meters at school in Canada. Just give us a bit of an idea about your sports background and where your love for sport comes from, and particularly
Mhm.
running, which is your real passion.
Yeah. I I am so irrationally and inordinately proud of the incredibly brief window of my athletic prowess. But I was a very good adolescent runner. I ran a 4:14 1500 meters at 13 and a 4:05 at 14.
Wow.
Today that doesn't sound like much. In the 70s, that was today they're running, as far as I can tell, 4-minute miles at the age of 14. But I briefly held the Canadian record in my age category, and then I had injury problems, and then I kind of didn't drop out of running, but wasn't a serious runner again, and then started becoming a serious runner again in my 50s. Um, and now now I'm pretty serious again. I ran a 5-minute mile at 53, a
Wow.
4:54 mile at 53 or 54, and a 5:15 mile at 57. I will not break 5-minute mile again, but
So do you see yourself now? I mean, I've read that you don't like to compete in races, but you like the training and the daily routine of going out for a run. Are you competitive then? And do you actually do races where you're competing against people in your age group?
I do. I hate racing though. I hated racing as a kid. I hated it even. I still do it, and I'm pleased when it's over. But I don't have the. I don't. I really. One of the reasons I think I stopped running competitively is I understood even as a kid I did not have the psychological temperament of an elite athlete. You can't be as terrified of racing as I was, and be a success in that sport. I would have a knot in my stomach for weeks before major races. I mean, it was an unsustainable activity.
Mm.
Um, so it's
I mean, was it that fear of competition that potentially made you stop competing after that early breakthrough? Why didn't you continue through your teen years and into your early 20s and potentially reach what might have been your peak?
yeah. I had a really bad notion um, that I carried with me when I was a kid, which was the only reason to engage in competitive sport was if you could win. And I didn't understand. It wasn't. I didn't understand it, or it wasn't explained to me, or something that actually being a mediocre runner is really, really fun.
Mm.
Finishing in the middle of the pack can be a joyful activity because you've removed a lot of the pressure and you can understand the sport for what it is. I've often thought if I was going to be an elite 1500-meter runner, how fast would I want to be? Would I like to be part of the small group at sub 3:30? Or would I like to be a 3:35 guy? And I think I would like to be a 3:35 guy. I'd like to go to Europe and run the minor circuit and like do, kind of outdoor miles and be, I don't think I'd want to be the kind of person who was competing for a podium spot at the World Championships. I just think that sounds to me like, and so much of your self-worth at that point is tied up in your running. I want to be someone who was just knew I was really good and
Mm.
was free of the kind of responsibility for being one of the best.
So it sounds like you don't have regrets about those decisions not to continue it from that young age, that you actually realized what you were going to
Mm.
enjoy and what the challenges were, and therefore you weren't up for it. That just was the reality of your life.
Yeah, I do I wonder whether I could have broken 4 minutes for the mile? Yeah. I mean, I do think about that but I don't. Regret would be way too strong a word.
Do you regret that you were that fast, that young? Because, like if you think back to it now, the attitude you had towards racing and that fear, I can relate. By the way, I didn't hold any national records as a 14-year-old, but I can distinctly remember coaches and people expecting me to run well. And I
Hmm.
hated that, the pressure that they applied, and then I would amplify it for myself. And if you'd been slow at 14, 15, maybe you would have been better at 17, 18. You would have been that sub 4 minute miler
Yeah.
because the pressure would have been delayed. I mean, if you look back now on your own youth development, did you invite that pressure on yourself or was it put on you by the system that you were part of?
I think I invited it. It certainly didn't come from my parents, who had a very healthy attitude. My dad in particular. In fact, I always tell the story of my father went with me once to the provincial championships. He would rarely attend my races, I think deliberately because he didn't, but I won 1500 meters, but he was working in the long jump pit. He was, raking the long jump pit. And so he would, as I would round the track, he would wave the rake at me, go Malcolm, and go back to raking the pit. So it was like there's no pressure there's in that situation. I think it was self-imposed, and I think I was too young to handle it. I think that's what was going. I think you're absolutely right. I think I would have had I peaked it, I would really have loved to enjoyed running as a college student, because I think the college running experience is a
Mm,
lot of fun. And
yeah.
I miss not, particularly if I'd gone to an American school where there is something, it's a real community, and there's something lovely about it.
I mean, we've spoken many times, and it's not as though we made this up, but there's this concept of the curse of the prodigy. And
Yeah.
when you're too good too young, I think you actually you doom yourself. And there's even research showing that the earlier you achieve success, probably the less likely you are to be active in your 20s and later in life.
Mhm.
Yeah. When I
Mm.
look at the when I look at the top 10 lists in my distances when I was 14, very few of those people went on to have any kind of um, credible adult career.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you went on to become, I mean, you were working as a sports reporter for a while. Was that, I often think of myself as a journalist in sport, that it's a way for me to be as close to elite sport without having to be one myself. Did
Mm.
you
I
find that
wasn't.
that was
I was never
similar
a
for you?
formal. I would write about sports. I was never
No.
actually a sports reporter. I was covering science, and I
Mm.
would write about these things out of interest, but not from the sports
Sports
perspective.
department. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a nice segue into the next question, and you've been quoted on a number of occasions around your thoughts on youth sport. And there's a quote that I looked up before we did this podcast, which says, "Stop chasing the pre-elite dream, start building a love for the sport because passion lasts longer than pressure," which kind of feeds into what you were saying now. Give
Mm.
us an idea about your thoughts around youth sport, because it is something that is clearly from all of the stuff you look up, that is one of the areas that you're most quoted about. And
Yeah.
why is it something that interests you a huge amount?
Well, many reasons. One, because of my own experience. When I think back on, I feel sad that I missed out on. There's a 30-year gap in my running history. I mean, I would run very, very, very casually, but something went wrong in the way I was introduced to the sport that robbed me of the pleasures of mediocrity. Um, and and I think that's true for lots of people. And I think that so one notion I had is is there some way for us to impress upon adolescents that the reason to participate in sport is that you're building a lifetime practice, not something, this isn't something that ends when you graduate from school. We're trying to get you interested in doing something you can do for the rest of your life. And the second thing that interests me, it's important to me, is I'm very, very interested in democratizing sport. And, you know, I had said to Ross in an email before that I wanted to talk about tennis, because
Mm.
Mm.
tennis, what happened to tennis is incredibly fascinating to me, and I think it's disturbing in some ways. Um, that tennis was always a relatively exclusive sport. It was a country club sport right around the world. But what's happened over the last 20 years in tennis is it's become more and more and more exclusive for a variety of reasons. One is that and you guys would know more about this than me, but one is the evolution of the way it's played has ruled out has narrowed the band of athletes who are capable of being elite, right? Martina Hingis does not exist anymore in professional tennis because
Mm.
we have the power game. So you have the game has turned into something that can only be played by a certain kind of athlete. And then the demands of preparation have become such that really only kind of wealthy or wealthier kids can compete at an elite level in tennis. I did a thing in my last book where I talked about junior tennis in the United States. And the minimum cost of having a child compete credibly in junior tennis in the United States is $100,000 a year, right? And you can't, so there's no such thing. You can't walk onto a tennis team after playing tennis on your local playground and expect to get a tennis scholarship in the United States or ever play on the tour. It can't happen, right? And that is mirrored. Tennis is the most extreme example. Golf, but golf is more obviously an exclusive sport. But the trend towards increased exclusivity in sports is, to my mind, one of the most troubling trends in developed countries. And I bring this back to running because running for the longest time has been immune from that, which is its beauty, right? Running is the sport that any kid can walk onto their cross country team, and if they're willing to put in, and you don't have to put in 20 hours a week, which you have to do in golf and tennis and swimming and rowing and all these other exclusive sports that you can be a Kenyan. You can grow up in relative economic deprivation and be a world-class competitor. How many sports are there in the world where you can grow up in economic deprivation and have a reasonable shot at being world-class? I saw a study recently on NBA players that was looking at the economic backgrounds of NBA players. The trend line in the NBA over the last 30 years or so has been that the pool of back in the 70s, there were many, many NBA players who came from impoverished backgrounds. That number gets smaller and smaller and smaller every year for the same reasons that we're talking about, right? To participate in the sport now requires a level of, and that I find that trend really, if sport can no longer serve a democratizing function, then we are impoverished as a society, right? What are you going to replace it with? Like video games? Like why? The whole point of sports is it was supposed to open doors, right? And now we're saying if your parents can't shell out for tennis camp and a trainer, forget about it, right? That's just it breaks my heart. Really, really breaks my heart.
I suppose the development of sport is a business within itself now, isn't it? Because there are many people out there who they find the young talent, they make sure that the parents can afford it, and that's how they make their money. So I guess it is just a business at that level. I mean, so what you're saying is that in a lot of sports, you talk specifically about tennis and golf and NBA, does it mean that scholarships don't exist these days for the really talented players that come from, potentially disadvantaged backgrounds, or they just don't make it even that far to be noticed to get scholarships?
Well, I don't think you can get, in many sports, you can't even get into the scholarship pool absent some large amount of parental investment in and if you look at the exemptions, the only kind of counterexamples out there are societies that have made a large public investment in youth sport. So hockey in Canada would be, you don't have to be rich to be in the pool, in the elite pool in Canadian hockey, because the society there's rinks everywhere and there's really well developed youth programs. I imagine the same is true in, I don't know, but Dutch football.
Yeah.
I think you need to be rich they have a system that is well funded and kind of, but those are exceptions. In most cases, it's the early stage of development is privatized, and the economic burden of developing an athlete has grown substantially, right?
So you pointed out the problem, and so you're saying the solution is to do what Dutch soccer, Canadian ice hockey has done. That those are the solutions. In other words, to develop youth programs that are not.
I think that's a bypass. I don't think it's the solution. They've bypassed the problem. I think. I don't know what you think, Malcolm.
Well, I was going to say this. I was going to suggest whimsically the solution is for everyone to run cross country. No, and I made this
It's
argument.
true.
It is true. I made this argument. I thought I did this what said this was and I got it's funny. It was a very it was I got really interesting responses. I said high school cross country teams should have 50 children on them, 50 kids on them on each team, and the scoring system should be that uh, you should get a substantial um, advantage for the number of participants you have in the race. In other words, your 50th runner should contribute meaningfully to the overall school score, as opposed to having a system where right now it's whatever it is. In America, it's I think top three or top four, top five
Mm.
positions are what count for scoring. But it's in a sport where there is no barrier, we should go all in. And so we should try and come up with strategies for exploiting the sports where there is a real democratic potential.
Mm.
Because what you've described is the outcome. This privatization of youth sport development and the resultant escalating costs and so on. What do you think is the cause? Has it been driven from top down, or is it a lack of resources? Because the
It's
Dutch, the Dutch and the Canadians, they've bypassed the resource constraints by just effectively flooding the market with opportunities. So there are people and facilities that can ensure that 90% of the interested parties play the game in that territory, right? The incentive structure must still be the same there. That you're trying to earn your way up a meritocracy till you get selected, and the next thing you're on the NHL ice. Um, I think South African rugby is probably similar to that, but we're also in a race to the bottom. I mean, we've got high schools are contracting kids at the age of 5 or 6 to come play for them 6 years later because they know the father's a big guy who played rugby. That's legitimate. It's like a sort of genetic targeting thing that happens. Yeah. So that whole world is in this race to the bottom, and it's interesting to wonder, like, why has that happened? Is it just we've become so obsessed with performance that we've lost perspective? Is it a cultural change? Is it financial?
well, it's so this is super interesting. This is we were emailing a little bit about this. So it is if you're interested in creating the greatest possible elite team or athlete, rationally, you would try and identify talent as early as possible. And there are all kinds of arguments about what you should do with that talent once you've identified it, right?
Hmm.
Whether but you should rationally, if you want to, especially if you're a smaller country, you should identify your promising football players as early as you can. So um, that's the kind of there's that argument. And then the second part is that I think we also have to appreciate that um, childhood as a kind of protected category is a cultural decision. Um, that, in the childhood was not a protected category in Victorian times. In the 18th and 19th century, kids went to work at whatever, in the coal mine at whatever, 7 or 8.
Mm.
There wasn't any notion that just because you were pre-adolescent, you were protected from having to make a living, right? So we deliberately set out in the 20th century, in the late 19th century, to create a protected category and to say that we're going to allow you a break from the rigors of the world, the marketplace, for some period of time from from the from we're not going to start your adult life at 7. We're going to start it at when you graduate from college or whenever you've that was a deliberate choice. And what we're doing now is we are saying we no longer want to make that deliberate choice to make childhood a protected category. We're going to start imposing it's a kind of fascinating parallel to to the way we thought about childhood for most of human development, which was it's not a separate thing. It's just you can start doing adult tasks as early. You can marry off girls at 14, which is what we did for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? That's a cultural decision about how you choose to make sense of this thing called childhood. So we're just going back to culturally, we're going back to the way we historically viewed this moment in human development, and we're compressing childhood, which was
Mm.
the standard position. I find that kind of sad because I think that the invention of childhood in the post-Victorian era was one of the great achievements of the 20th century. I think it
Mm.
was a fantastic, beautiful thing. And it kind of breaks my heart to think that we're chucking it away. But you can see the compression of childhood. It's not just in sport. It's in, if you've got, I have small children, I see every day the pressures on making my 4-year-old, why doesn't my 4-year-old know her letters? Why should my 4-year-old know her letters, right? It's a cultural decision. We know she's going to learn her letters at some point, right? The cultural decision is at what point do we have an expectation she should know them? I grew up with the expectation whenever. Now it's like she's 4, it's too late, right? Cultural decision. So it's happening everywhere, and
Mm.
we need to decide whether we're going to resist this, or whether we're going to succumb to it.
What does it look like if sports says we're going to resist this? Do they delay the identification and selection and competitive sport? Because that doesn't land too well with many people. Where was it recently? They said they were going to do that, and there was a backlash. You're all
Yeah.
going woke. Kids must have kids know what winning and losing is. How can you do
Yeah.
this? You're compromising the world. But what does it look
There's
like
a,
to resist?
I always talk about this book by a woman named Linda Flanagan, which I thought was brilliant, but on youth sports. And Linda makes a number of suggestions, but one of them, this is going to sound whimsical, but I think it's actually it gets the conversation going in the right direction. She was talking about team sports, and she was like, parents should be banned from attending um, sporting events of their children.
I would do that 100%. I watch my friend's 9-year-old play rugby, and then I go watch the 10-year-olds play. The first thing I'd do is I'd have no parents on the sideline.
But that's difficult to enforce that.
Mm.
Yeah.
But I agree
So
with that.
never.
Yeah.
So what that
That's
does,
an impossible task, really, isn't it?
well, not if. So it's interesting when I was a teenage runner in Canada in the 70s. We were going to these. There were no parents there. In fact, there was one runner whose dad would come to. I'm talking about championship meets. Like when my father came to that one provincial championship only because we didn't have a bus to take the team and he had to drive kids. And remember, his first inclination was not to sit in the stands and watch, but to volunteer in the long jump pit, right? There were no parents didn't come. There was no cultural expectation. They would come to meets. There was zero, no one. I mean, the idea that if your parents came to a practice, you would be so embarrassed that. So we invented this
Yeah.
idea. And the Linda Flanagan's argument is that uh, that's a really, really crucial step when the parent attends because it shifts the psychological construction of the activity from a private activity that the child is exploring to an activity that the where the parent has an interest. It becomes an interested party, so it becomes an expression of the parent's neuroses, desires, thwarted ambitions, what have you. And I don't think you can, the protecting childhood starts with banishing the parent. The parent is the one who's destroying childhood in this. The parent has gone from the protector of childhood to the opponent of childhood in our contemporary model. So I do think you have to remove parents from the. I mean, I realize it's impossible,
Mm.
but
But
Yeah.
there's no.
Yeah.
you can also, I
Practically.
mean, you can also legislate. I mean, I always think the best example of things that potentially could happen is once you get younger and younger with young, we talked about some of the young soccer players that have been pulled into clubs at 6 or 7 years of age.
Mm.
Eventually, somebody's going to say it's enough of that now because now you're pushing it, and there's going to be some legislation which will say we're now going to make it 13 or 14 because people will keep pushing it lower and lower until somebody stops it, which is
Yeah,
inevitably going to happen, surely.
Yeah, it
yeah.
hasn't yet. So maybe they'll
Yeah.
stop it at 2. Maybe they'll stop it at conception. I don't
But
know.
there's some interesting trends. I was reading again. I'm now trafficking in areas where Ross, you know way more than me. But I was reading some of this really interesting stuff about, how the Germans in particular have rethought the way they train kids to play football. and the idea that they delay full scrimmage until quite late, and they're playing these kind of 3-on-3, 4-on-4, those things where they rotate them out every 15 minutes, and
Yeah.
they do. But and they would argue the formal argument for that is this is a more effective way of learning of skill development. But what it really is the reintroduction of play,
Mm.
of unstructured play into it's the reintroduction of childhood into the acquisition of football skills, right?
Mm.
That's the way that children would naturally play football before all of this formalization is 3-on-3, 4-on-4, very, very loose, no assigned goalie, very, like all that kind of thing that's the way you play on the playground when you were. And so they're just going back to, it's a kind of clever way of just going back to the way, organized way of going back to the way things were. And I think
Yeah.
you know, uh, that's maybe to my mind, it's a very promising way to kind of have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I just love the concept of refining childhood in lots of different areas, not just sport. I
Mm.
mean, I've got a 7-year-old daughter who I agree that play is probably the most important thing she can do right now, and it's lovely to hear that that's people believe in childhood still.
Yeah.
It's
I
sad when
have,
it doesn't happen.
I was going through this because I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, and my wife was a very, very, very good runner. And, I wasn't bad. And I look at them and I can't help myself. I look at the way my 4-year-old runs. I'm like scrutinizing, her form. Is she a 4-foot striker? I can't, and I can feel it already. I have to resist this impulse to try and some part of me desperately wants them to be like elite, 800
Yeah,
meter runners or whatever. But
yeah.
With what we've just been discussing in mind, I wonder how you reflect back to some of the earlier writings that I think you may not necessarily know all of them, but that were so influential in how many sports try to drive early specialization and early high training volumes because of ideas like 10,000 hours and the idea of deliberate practice and so forth. Like, how do you think back to that now, like in the context of what we've just discussed?
well, I think I screwed up in writing Outliers because I wasn't specific enough about what I felt the lesson of 10,000 hours was. One is that I was speaking very narrowly about the acquisition of a cognitive skill.
Mm.
It had nothing to do with sports. I don't know why. There's no mention of sports in that chapter in Outliers about 10,000 hours. It's about chess and about computer programming and about so somehow the sports people got a hold of it. And I think maybe because there was that other people in the deliberate practice realm have talked something about sports, but I never talked about sports.
Mm.
I thought it was absurd that you would. The only thing I would think about it is that, to be clearly it takes a lot of practice to be an effective footballer or NBA guard but I wasn't thinking about that at all. And the second thing is that the assumption that I didn't speak to the nature of the practice. So even if we do apply it to sports and we say you need 10,000, it's not true, but let's say we do apply it to sports and we say you need 10,000 hours of practice to be a really good footballer. That doesn't mean 10,000 hours of playing football, right? It could mean any number of things. It's just talking about preparation. It's talking about considered preparation. So maybe part of our considered preparation is playing other sports or working out in a weight room or
Mm.
learning, sitting in a classroom, learning about whatever. I don't know. The idea, I think people, so they made two faulty assumptions in extrapolations from my writing on 10,000 hours. Like I said, one was to apply to sports, which I never, and the second was to assume that we were talking about that practice it simply meant the duplication of the very activity that you would be engaged in as an expert. Chess would be, they use the chess model. Like when you practice for chess, you play chess, right? and everyone assume, and because we talk about chess all the time in the deliberate practice realm, people assume that, oh, that's the model that follows for. It's not, I needed 10,000 hours of practice to be a good. I needed more than that to be a good interviewer, but it wasn't 10,000 hours of practice interviewing. It was
Mm.
watching interviews, it was reading, it was writing myself, it was thinking about like what makes someone interesting, or it was all kinds of things. So anyway, so that would be my response to I felt so I did a lousy job of explaining what I was talking about, and that allowed those ideas um, to be misconstrued.
I don't know if you did a lousy job of it, but I mean, people were going to do that, and you know that your book and ideas there spawned a few others, and they became really influential. I went to the Rugby Football Union, that's rugby in England, invited me because they decided they need to restructure their talent pathways, and because like we do in South Africa, they pick an under 13 national team to play rugby for England, which is ridiculous. I don't know how much you follow rugby, but because of the emphasis on size and stature, like a 13-year-old picking it's just a waste of time and money because by the time they're 15, 16, they're different human beings. So the RFU wanted to do a symposium, and I was invited with a few others to present. And they divided people into two camps. There was the 10,000 hour camp, and then there was the not. And people were literally making the argument that if you don't pick at 12 and specialize, you cannot accumulate 10,000 hours until you get to 23, and then you'd be behind all your peers. And so they were taking that argument and they were applying it in the most literal sense possible. It was
Yeah.
extraordinary. I mean, I'm glad to say that they didn't take that advice to heart and they stopped picking under 13s and they moved the age of
Yeah.
selection back to 16. So I think sense prevailed, but it's just interesting. Like why would it have been so attractive to people, the deliberate practice 10,000 hour model is because it gives them
A number.
autonomy, influence.
Yeah, it's a number.
And also that I wanted to say that the point I was making, if you go back and read the chapter in Outliers on 10,000 hours, the point I thought I was making was I simply wanted to say, given that the developmental path for cognitively complex activities is so long, you can't do it by yourself, right? So I remember talking to a world-class chess player, and he grew up outside of New York in White Plains, which is a suburb maybe 25 miles from New York. And I said to him, where did you play chess as a kid? He goes, I would play in Greenwich Village, where there's a whole chess community. And they sit out in a park in Washington Square Park and they play games. You get a lot of games in with a lot of really good players. And he would play there all the time. And I said, well, how often did you play? And he said, I would play, I would go in after school every day. I was like, how did you get there? He goes, my mom would drive me. And I was like, oh, his mom drove him. My point is, you couldn't tell the story of his chess development without talking about his mom, who was able to get in her car, well, I don't know how many days a week, and drive 25 miles into the city and sit around while her son played 2, 3 hours of chess and then drive him home. That's the point I was trying to make. Like, he needed to have that practice to be a good tennis player. And in order to get that practice as an 11-year-old, he needed a mom who had the time to drive him in, right? I thought that's what I was saying. I was saying, like, this is hard. It takes a community, right? You can't do it. Once you understand these developmental pathways, you understand that these are collective, resource-intensive efforts. And so when we talk about excellence, we're talking about communities. We're not talking about individuals. Committed communities. And going the Canadian hockey and Dutch football examples, or the South African rugby examples, are examples of committed communities.
Mm.
If you're a gifted young football player in Amsterdam, you're not doing it. No one asks you to do it by yourself, right? No one. And anyway, I thought that was the argument I was making. And I thought there was something beautiful in that idea and I wanted the mom to get some credit. The guy's not he's not a grandmaster without his mom. Like, why does no one talk about his mom? It drove me crazy. Like, your mom spent She spent 10,000 hours driving into the city.
Yeah, everybody needs a mom that's going to give you the lift. Yeah, exactly. Or a dad. But yeah, I agree. It's
There
one
is
element that you, yeah.
this is something that has driven me crazy for years, which is that the parents, the parental investment in these things gets taken for granted, or by the time the person is like the best in the world at 26, they stop talking about the parent. It drives me crazy. Like you're not there without some parent who basically put their life on hold
Yeah.
for 15 years. So you could be, you could be Andre Agassi, or you could be, Sinner. But anyway,
So we're saying parents are essential, but they shouldn't come and watch games.
exactly. They are essential. They should be
Yes,
essential and they should be absent.
you're essential up to when the first whistle blows, and then you come back to be essential after the final whistle.
See, I would argue that parents that do what is necessary to grow a young athlete are trying to live vicariously through that athlete from their own insecurity. So if
Sometimes,
you're a
not always.
part-time supporter, well, yeah, I'm guessing that, but I'm guessing that there's some psychology behind a parent that will give absolutely everything to make their kids succeed and push them to a level where they would need to succeed.
Mhm.
So I always think that's an interesting concept because there are some parents that will just leave a child to participate in what he loves, and that will lead to longevity in that sport. There are some parents that will push a child into some level and degree of expertise. Some may continue it when they're independent enough to make their own decisions, but some may not. But at some point, the parent plays a pivotal role in the longevity of that person's participation. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the Ingebrigtsen case, the Ingebrigtsen
Mm.
family, to my mind, is such an interesting and kind of heartbreaking example of this, because clearly the father is, I mean, the kids clearly have some extraordinary running genes, but the father clearly has some really, really, really good ideas about how to develop talent. But then it all goes in this heartbreaking way. It all goes south, and they have this public meltdown, and the father is now estranged from the boys, and I just think there's something that's an example of like all that is good about parental investment and also all that's
Mm.
sad about it and tragic about it. And,
Mm.
50 years from now, um, 30 years from now, when Jakob looks back on his life, he's going to be as I think, heartbroken about what happened to his relationship with his father as he is going to be proud of his own accomplishments. Right?
Yeah.
I don't, and I think I think we need to take the lessons of that case seriously. Mm.
Mm.
I'm just to take a short segue because I think it's the right time to ask you this question. For those of you, for those of us who read your books and listen to your podcast and engage with the content that you produce for the New Yorker, I always wonder, for me as a journalist, where you see yourself in terms of what you write about. In other words, do you see yourself as a provocateur, as a critical thinker, as an agitator? Do you see yourself being able to present data and therefore change people's minds? In other words, where do you see your role in this
Mhm.
world through your books?
I mean, I still think of myself as very much a journalist, and I'm someone I'm just a translator. I stand between experts and the public and try and make ideas come alive and stories come alive for people, give them access to. I've been doing this thing recently where I find interesting people and I just sit with them and record hours and hours and hours of tape and then find the story and I've been doing this right now with this totally fascinating intensive care specialist, a guy who
Hmm.
works in an ICU in a big hospital, and he deals with people. He deals with death, right? People, you go to the ICU, and some large proportion of people who go there die while they're there. So he sees more death than almost anyone else. Um, I don't really know what stories I will tell, but my role is to get someone like that who has no access to the public and who the public has no access to, find the stories that he wants to tell and then find a way to tell them. And that's how I see my role.
Because the reason why I asked this, and as a follow-on question, is that Ross has mentioned the 10,000 hours and lots of concepts that you put into the world through your books and through the evidence that you've got, which have fundamentally changed the way that people think about certain aspects of life, whether it's being born in the first third of the year to the 10,000 hours, all those types of things. So when you write these books and you do these investigations, are you surprised that they take off and find a life of their own beyond just the pages of the book that you're writing?
A little bit. Outliers in particular, like you mentioned the thing about birth date and the relative age effect. That one, I did not see the kind of, I didn't realize that. So in explaining the data on how in both sport and academics, relative age effect, that your relative age in your class, particularly in pre-adolescence, is a powerful predictor of your performance, right? Now we have enormous amount of data on this, and that these effects persist. So we have these phenomenon where, football teams are overwhelmingly from kids, composed of kids born in the first third of the year. So I explain all this in that book, and my point is, once again, my point was, so if you are a kid who has a series of disadvantages, you're single parent, not a lot of money, maybe you're dyslexic, and you're also the youngest in your elementary school classroom, that's too many disadvantages. It's too much. You should be held back a year so you could have at least the advantage of being the relatively oldest in your class, right? That's a very humane way. Or secondarily, if you're making sense of the athletic performance of 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds, for God's sake, account for the relative age effect. There is a 12-month difference between the eldest and youngest in one, and that's huge at the age of 7. So there are all these, there's all these really, really interesting things that people are starting to do, particularly once again in the Netherlands and places like that, where they're starting to build into their models of talent development the relative age effect. So or the British, what's the great example? British squash, you graduate to your next age category on your birthday, not on January 1st, which is really brilliant because it means that in the course of a given year of competition, you have a period of time when you are the relatively youngest in your cohort, a period of time when you are in the middle, and a period of time when you're the oldest. So you get advantages in all three of those situations, right? You actually kind of want to be the youngest for a little bit because you like the idea of being stressed and learning how to cope with your physical disadvantage. And you like the confidence that comes from being the relatively oldest. So let's give every child a shot at all three of those positions. And then secondarily, what they do is they realize that you can't have your championship once a year because the timing of your championship relatively advantages those who are the oldest at that time. So I think they have 3 championships, 4 championships a year, right? So everyone has a shot to compete at the moment of, that's brilliant. And they've realized their selection mechanism, British squash has become a lot more competitive on the world stage in part because they've changed the way they make sense of youth performance and they're just selecting better. So,
And do you think that what you wrote in the book about that has had an influence on that decision? Do you have any idea if that has affected that decision?
Well, no, so that was academic work that was going on independently and is now starting to bear fruit in specific sports. But my point was the people who read my book, what happened was that upper middle class parents looked at this and said, oh, my kid's doing well now, but if I hold her back a year, she'll do even better. And for me, I can afford to pay an extra year of tuition in the private school. So you have this, there's a private school near me, a wealthy private school, where like they all hold their kids back. There are kids who are 19 and still in high school. I was almost out of college at 19. This is ridiculous. Kids with every advantage of the world are looking for an additional advantage. And so now you're like, you've got a beard and you're graduating from high school. I mean, it's just it is exactly the wrong lesson. This wasn't a means for the wealthy for the privileged to get more privilege. It was supposed to be a means for the disadvantaged to get an advantage, right? So like, I don't know, I throw up my hands at a certain point, like any good idea will inevitably be exploited by those who have um, the least need for an additional advantage.
So
That's
there's no truth in the rumor then that people that wrote your book, couples that read your book, tried to procreate more fervently in May and June, so they
people
would have children in January, February.
people have told me that they did just that.
I've heard
Absolutely.
that. I've heard that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly Canadians who are really into hockey, because Canadian hockey is one of those sports, by the way, which has not taken these lessons to heart. They still do the same brain dead selection of 6-year-olds, identifying the strongest, the tallest and biggest 6-year-olds and putting them in traveling squads or whatever they do, which is, I mean, it drives me, particularly since the relative age effect was discovered by a Canadian 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Like, it just drives me, I, the idea that
Yeah.
Canadians are stupid about the most important sport.
Yeah, there's so much inertia. I've given talks to sports on the pitfalls and challenges of early talent selection, and one of the drivers of those pitfalls is this relative age effect. And I mean, the data from South African rugby is from the age that we pick those 13-year-olds to 16, 75% of them vanish from the system completely. They don't even make the top 400 players by the time they're 16.
Yeah.
So it's just such an inefficient system. And then it makes you realize that there still have to be that many players at 16. So three-quarters of them are coming in without the early start that the 13-year-olds got. So every selection you make, there's an omission. So you lose twice on every pick you make. But the inertia to change this, it's impossible. You just cannot fix it. I don't know why,
Yeah.
but they just do not listen.
No.
No, it's very frustrating.
And just a final question, because we want to get onto some of the specifics, and I know that we all have a passion for track and field, and we want to talk about. But my final question for me to you as a journalist, based on what we've just discussed, is that we all know that conceptualizing and distilling an idea into something that is easy to understand is always very tempting. When you're writing your books, where does the motivation come up with a concept like we've discussed some of them now, but obviously in your book there are many examples of how you distill an idea into even a one-line sentence. How tempting is it to try and get that one-line sentence versus the credibility of the research that you're doing, or is that even a battle for you?
No, you have to, it's a necessary, so if you're a popularizer, as I am, you you have to make compromises. There's no way around it. If the academic's job, the expert's job is to make the argument in as nuanced um, and complex and accurate way possible. Um, if the journalist simply replicates that process, then they have no audience, right?
Mm.
So you have to do something as a journalist. You necessarily have to simplify because your audience is different, right? The expert has the luxury of a educated, sophisticated, and motivated audience. I don't have that luxury. So, or anyone in my position. So we simplified. Simplifying is fraught with all kinds of dangers. Occasionally you oversimplify. Occasionally you leave out something that in retrospect you realize you shouldn't have left out. But there's a wonderful upside, which is that you get people, you get a whole range of people who would never have been exposed to that idea at all, exposed to the idea. And there's that's beautiful. People need, I used to always say people are experience rich and theory poor. And you need to give them ways of organizing their experience, right? That is my job. And um, uh, when we're talking about relative age effect, for example, every parent has the experience of seeing their kid lose a race to someone who seems really, really big for their age, right? They don't know how to make
Yeah.
sense of that. Well, what do? You give them a theory which says this is This is a systemic problem in the way we organize and make sense of youth athletics, right? That's what you do. That's the job. And when you give them that thing, they can go, oh, so maybe I should ask my elementary school to organize the three first grade classrooms by their birth month, right? That would be a really, 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 really logical and simple way to address this problem in the first grade. Do people do that? No, they don't, because like you said, there's a lot of inertia.
Mm.
Experience rich, theory poor is four words that basically sum up what we were saying earlier about how people came to understand the trans woman in sport issue. Because I was coming at it for years trying to offer theory. I thought I'd make people theory rich, but they were experience poor. And it took two or three experience. They said, this is a problem. So
Yeah,
the ability
it's
to tell a
great.
story like that is really, it's profound. I mean, I think, and I've said this many times about you and others like David Epstein, is sports scientists like have failed horrendously at translating our own work to the public, and it's fallen on the likes of you and David to do that job for us, and we need to be better at it ourselves. Not to take away from what you're doing, but because we're almost outsourcing communication of our own knowledge. It's ridiculous for sports scientists listening to this.
Mm.
David is the gold standard for this, because David is actually he's actually trained. Unlike me, he has a background in science, and
Mm,
he absorbs the science at a way deeper level than I do before he. I've learned a lot from his writing.
mm.
He's very good. When we lived in New York together, we would run a lot. He's a very good runner.
He dragged me to the stair session that you, I think, introduced him to.
Oh
What's
yes,
the
that's
name of that
right.
park? And he made me a couple of times. We went and did it in the cold of winter. I felt like Rocky running up and down those stairs, chasing David up. And
Can't believe
I
you.
think I owe you for that one.
Yes, you do. You do. I'm glad he didn't invite me. I would have loved to have joined in.
I think he'd left New York by then because I said to him, "Will Malcolm be there?" He said, "No, he's not in town."
Sounds like a date that should be had in sometime in the future.
Oh, I wish. I wish. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a bit of track because this is one area that I know that we can all have good conversations about this. And in the lead up to this podcast, we've obviously I've read a lot of stories about your opinions about track and field. There's been stuff about how the spectators and the format of track and field has really it's almost own worst enemy. First of all, tell us your track and field passion. Tell me about what it is for you and how does it translate into your thinkings around it.
I well, I watch every Diamond League meet. I structure my working days so that I have nothing happens during that. I have to watch them live. Um, I get nervous by proxy before big 1500 meters races. I think the Tokyo 1500 meters. I don't know if there is an outside of like major life events. I don't know if I've looked forward more to anything like the upcoming World Championship 1500 meters. Um, I I was out for a run yesterday, and a good half of the run was I was just filled with rage about the decision by the Zurich DL not to let Jakob Ingebrigtsen run in the. But what are they thinking? Like, what? It drives me crazy. This is a sport. It's entertainment, and you're not going to let the best distance runner of his generation compete because I mean I don't know whether your audience is familiar with this, but Jakob's been injured all year
Mm.
and he's now fit again and he wants to run the last Diamond League race of the year and they won't let him in because he hasn't run in a previous Diamond League race because Zurich is the championship. Like it's just I mean it's like no other sport would do this. Would remove their biggest anyway. Before
Yeah.
we
Especially in a middle distance race. I mean, it's like it's one thing if you're taking one of 8 lanes away from a 100-meter guy, but it's a 1500. Put him in a wild card slot and let's go.
yeah. Anyway, my point is I am unusually emotionally invested in track and field. I've spent way, way, way too much time uh, watching old YouTube races and wondering about various runners.
What's your favorite event?
Mm.
We know you're a
It
1500
cha-
meter guy, but
it changes because I've recently become incredibly interested again in the 800 meters.
mm,
Um, because I think I was saying this to Ross, the 800 meters is just really, David Epstein has this argument about how the 800 meters is the weirdest event in track and field. It's anomalous. It seems to exist outside of, according to rules that are different from all the other running races. And I resisted this notion for the longest time, but now I'm totally in agreement. There's something weird going on that I can't figure out with 800 meters. So that, but also I have a great,
What do you mean by that weird going on? Could you explain what you mean by weird?
well, I wish David were here to kind of, I can only give a kind of minor, well, the effect of uh, doping seems to be, particularly in the women's 800, seems to be most pronounced in the 800 meters. Uh,
Mm.
the the um, the useful life of an 800-meter runner at the top seems shorter than other. These guys will post a time and then not come near it again for the
Mm.
rest of their careers. The margin for error seems really, 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 really small. It's this weird combination. The cognitive demands of running it seem greater than any other. Sebastian Coe has this great argument about the 800 meters where he talked about how you're required to make some very sophisticated decisions strategically, but you're in no position to do so because you're operating at such a kind of under so much kind of physiological load. Anyway, I could go on. It just seems to me like, the explosion in times this season to me requires some. I just feel like the 800 meters has gone crazy in the last
Yeah.
12 months. Like Josh Howie is running 142 in the rain. Like what? Like what is this? Kids are running, a 16-year-old just ran 142. Like think something, the whole thing is bananas in this kind of fascinating way.
Yeah. I mean, it is physiologically, it's such a fascinating event because it's the last event before even pacing is optimal. So in a 1500, the best performance is going to come from being able to finish the last 100 at more or less the same speed you ran the first 100. Now, you're going to see tactical races where the last 100 is like the other night. Laros runs a 12.5 or something last 100. It's obviously the fastest because it's a slower tactical race. But to break a world record, 1500 even paced and beyond. 800, the first lap has to be faster than the second, and you accept some level of slowing down. And then the physiologist in me says, well, what's going on there? And it's because in the 800, it's short enough that you can still survive fatigue. In the 1500, you have to avoid it. And that's what's happening when I say fatigue, what's happening at the level of the muscle. And so I think it's so fragile because if you go 1% too fast in the 800, the costs you pay are disproportionately high because you're in the death zone physiologically. Like you are, it is, and the 400 is the same. It's like also in the death zone, but the difference is you don't have tactical decisions because you've got your own lane and you can effectively say, I'll run my race and see what I do. The 800, you can't do that. So it's very complex and physiologically like beyond the limit to the point that you're just actually trying to survive it. And that observation about doping helping the woman, when I was involved in that Semenya case, it was quite clear that the DSDs were massively overrepresented in the 800. Like you know of three, right? Because of the Rio Olympic podium. There are others. I'm not going to say who they were. We're not allowed to, but there are others. And so then you say, well, male advantage is pretty much the same everywhere. Why the 800? Why doping on the 800 for women? There's something curious about the 800. I can't put my finger on that part of it, but there's definitely something to it.
And I mean, just to support what you were saying, I remember Hezekiel Sepeng, who was South Africa's great 800-meter runner in the 90s, late 90s, early 90s, World Championship silver medalist at one point. I was good friends with him, and we used to ask him when he just got fourth, fifth on the odd occasion, couldn't quite get gold in any of the major events, and I said to him, well, why is it so difficult? And he said exactly what he said to you. The margin of of error is so small that if you have to run around somebody at the 200-meter point at the start of the race, as opposed to just run economically, that can be the difference between
Done.
first and last. So as he agreed that was the problem with it, is that it's such a fickle event, even for the very top runners in the world.
Yeah, fickle. Fickle is the word I was searching for. Yes,
Mm.
that's what it is. And I feel like there are 800-meter races where I feel like if you ran the same race 10 times, you could get five different winners. And I don't have
Mm.
that same confidence. I wouldn't expect to see the same outcomes in if I ran a 5,000 race with the same crew five times.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe not so much right now on the women's side, but for sure on the men's side.
I suppose, I mean, there's beauty in that, isn't there? I mean, there's beauty in the fact that it's indiscriminate in terms of what the result's going to be. It's not necessarily ever decided. I mean, we have had some dominant 800-meter runners in the past, but it's not been something that's happened in the last 2 decades, as far as I know. We haven't had one dominant person that's run like an Ed Moses, for instance, who's
Yeah.
dominated for 10 years. It's never happened in the 800.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is an interesting thing. And where do you think track and field is now in terms of its popularity? Because for us watching this, and for us who watch track and field on TV, I always get slightly disappointed because the first thing I ever look for when I'm watching a Diamond League event is to see what the stands look like, how many people are there. And it's always disappointing that majority of the time you don't see the stands full, but then you do see them reasonably full when they go to the States, for instance.
I don't know, like
Yeah.
Diamond League races in Europe are well attended.
Oh, yeah.
Really well attended.
Zurich, Brussels, yes, but not the
I once
smaller
flew
ones.
a couple of years ago. I flew to Switzerland just to go to the Lausanne DL. It was like a little treat I gave myself. Stands are full.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I think this is a marketing, in some sense, is a marketing problem because we're still too wedded to this notion of the of that everything should take place at the same time in the same venue. And I think we need to accept the fact that it's really these are a whole series of sports that have to use there's a lovely term that sociologists use. They talk about some things affordances. It's kind of properties and characteristics. Each track event has its own affordances, and the long jump does not belong in a big stadium. You need to be there should be a dedicated there should be a dedicated facility for watching the jumps. It's intimate. It should at the very least they should be in a tennis facility, right? Which where you want the crowd on top of the performer, and then if people experienced a long jump and a high jump and a triple jump competition happening at the same time in a very, very intimate space with fans on all four corners, they would have a different appreciation of what was going on, right? Um, I always watch, there are these mile races now sometimes where the crowd gathers along the track and they have
Mm.
three or four lanes open. And I just think it's a great experience. Right now, obviously, you can't see what's going on. I mean, you have to look up at the TV screen or whatever to see. But like, we had to be much more willing to experiment with the way in which we're presenting this to the public. That would be my first point. And maybe, having meets that are dedicated to a much smaller number of events would be a start. And the other thing is I don't understand why the athletes are still not understanding that they are entertainers. And there's a crucial, there's every other professional sport has made this leap where the athlete understands that they are an athlete, a very serious athlete who is, whose goal is to win, but at the same time they have a responsibility to their audience, right? Whereas if I go, so I like to follow elite runners on Strava. The number of elite runners who post their workouts, real workouts on Strava is like vanishingly small. I don't understand. Why can't I? I know you don't want to give up whatever competitive advantage there may be in people seeing, but you have to give that up because your responsibility is to your audience, and your audience wants to know. It's part of the experience of being a huge fan of the 1500 should be that I need to know how Laros's workouts differ from Negus's. That would, and then the other thing is during the race itself, why don't we get physiological data? They should
Mm.
have wearables and I should know every single thing that can be measured of the athlete during the race. And if I'm watching a 5,000 meters and I see that 3 laps from the finish, you know, Fisher's or Kiplimos, whatever's numbers are starting to go south, and the commentator can say, "Watch out, someone's in a," that just makes a far more engrossing experience. You got to keep up with these kinds of trends if you want to engage an audience. Like, there's a way to structure a 5,000 meters so that it could be an absolutely gripping experience, right? And we're just not willing to kind of move with the times.
I mean, one of the things that I looked at when I looked at Michael Johnson's Grand Slam track events, which have obviously stuttered a bit since he launched it, but one of the things I liked about it was that he didn't have pace setters. There was the idea that people were competing against each other. So there was and one of the things that I always think in track and field that takes away from the spectacle is when you've got pace setters looking for time, but you're not focused on the competition. That's why the Olympic Games and the World Championships have such a great attraction, because you haven't got pace setters setting it's literally that person versus that person who's going to win. It's not somebody running the first 4 laps on their own. What are your thoughts on that? Is that one area where they perhaps he missed a
100%
beat by
agree. I
focusing
remember
on time?
Ross, 100% agree. I remember Ross, I think I was on this podcast where you were explaining why Ingebrigtsen lost the 1500 meters at the Olympics last year. And he made a miscalculation, right? He made a pacing miscalculation. And that was the
Follow
beauty.
Chariot, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was the beauty of that race. Now, in a paced race or with wave lights, he wins, don't you think?
Oh, 100. Yeah, he'd be 3 world titles and an Olympic gold at least by now.
Yeah. I remember listening to you then. That was when I heard that podcast, your analysis of that. That was when I became a foe of pacing and wavelights. It's like it was so much more interesting to watch him make that and because you sensed it watching it. You're like, he's really pressing. Why is he pressing? He's the best in the world, right? And in that, you don't get that. We've removed that drama from so many of the track and field performances.
Especially like I watched Faith Kipyegon go after the 3000, and I don't mind the odd one. You like announce this is a world record attempt on the 3000, and by all means use the lights. But in that race, there was no intrigue at all because you could see how far behind the light she was. So in the end, she got close, but there wasn't suspense. It was weird. It was like a mixed emotions thing of like she's within a second, but actually it's not happening because you could actually see the failure. So at the very least, if they have lights, they have to switch those things off with 400 to go and stop the clock and build something. Give the audience a little whack of dopamine. They're coming back for more. But yeah, the intrigue is gone because they're just survival tests, paced races. Who can run 327 for 3 3/4 laps and who slows down more in the last 400?
Yeah.
I mean, Ross and I've often discussed the fact that the marathon distance has got a similar affliction in that you have pace setters and it takes away from the drama of the event. And if you're watching somebody running a 201 or a 202, visually that looks exactly the same thing. So time means nothing from a visual perspective. Whereas if you have a competition like we have at the World Championship at the Olympics, you have an intrigue, you have
Yeah.
tactics, you have that
Yeah.
I find that absolutely fascinating. So
What was the Olympic marathon where some guy, I forgot his name, I think was he Mexican? Went out crazy fast and then
Uh,
completely collapsed 10 miles in.
could be. You're not thinking of the guy who got tackled by the Irish priest, the Brazilian
No,
guy
no, no, no,
in.
no. This was within the last two Olympics. It was
I
somebody goes
don't
out
recall.
mm,
seriously fast, and then he ends up sitting down on the course. But he was
mm,
leading by some massive amount. And no, but it was like my point is like it was incredibly interesting because you were waiting for him you were waiting for him to collapse. It was a kind of like,
Mm.
but you wouldn't have seen that in a more disciplined. Yeah, I totally agree. Why would you rob a spectator sport of any potential drama? Like
mm,
nothing that robs a sport of inherent drama of. It's the same thing, in basketball. A basketball game is a narrative, and the one of the primary rules of any kind of uh, of any thriller, which is what a sporting event is a thriller, right, with an uncertain outcome, is that things should speed up before towards the end, right? So what does
mhm,
basketball do? basketball in America, the NBA, slows down towards the end. The last 2, 3 minutes of any NBA game typically take 10, they could take 15 minutes because it's
Mm.
timeouts, eh, referees calling fouls, ad breaks. I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, why you can't have a sport and disregard the rules of narrative. And so putting the rules of narrative back into track and field would be a really really useful step.
Plus, I mean, if you do a paced 1500 at 327, there's maybe three people in the world who can do it, and usually only one of them's in the race. So that race with Kipyegon, everyone knows the winner. There's only one question left: is it a world record? And then the wave lights take that intrigue away also. If you made it a non-paced race in a 1500, and that's why the Tokyo one's going to be so good. There are going to be 5 or 6 guys who could win that.
Yeah.
So it's
Um,
just a,
who
it
do you
is
think,
a,
Russ? I've been dying to ask you. So who was your favorite for Tokyo?
Laros is going to win that race.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I think. That's my pick. I'm going dark horse.
Because he
But
was
after
so
watching him, oh, he was so good. Where was the last race in Brussels?
Brussels.
And
Yeah,
so I think, and so my feeling is that in the app, look, no one knows. Maybe Ingebrigtsen comes back a la Hodgkinson and almost at his very best on day one. Because Ingebrigtsen in that race would push it to 328, 329, and then I'd have more doubts about Laros's ability. But if
Mm.
Ingebrigtsen's not there, who's pushing that? Not Kerr, not okay, Nagus may not be there, not Hocker. They all want to wait. And I just think Laros has got more now. I saw in those last 200, man. Did you see that?
Mm-mm.
Was it unbelievable?
I'm going to look at it now.
Crazy,
What did he?
crazy kick.
His last 100 was 12.5. What was his last 200?
20, 25, 6, I think it was.
Yeah,
So, so,
it
so
looked
like if,
so easy. It
so if
looked
you,
like
oh yeah, he didn't look like he was pushing.
yeah.
So if you're thinking now from the perspective of Hocker, Kerr, even okay, there's a few other
Oh,
guys as
look,
well.
there's
The coach from Kenya saying, well, this guy's got that. You got to go 328, 329, not in a championship race. There's only one guy who would do that, and that's Ingebrigtsen, and no one knows what he's got.
Yeah. But if
So
he is, but Ingebrigtsen has no choice but to push it, right? That's the only
yeah,
situation. So you know he's going to do it. He may collapse in the last lap, but you know he has to put. So I think the race will be honest because Ingebrigtsen needs it to be honest.
yeah. So if he's got the ability to run 329, that they'll run 320. It'll take a low 329 or high 328 to win. And then it becomes who burns the least energy trying to stay right on him for the first 2.5, 3 laps. Whoever's
Yeah.
in fourth or fifth at the bell, I reckon, is your winner.
I think
So,
the fact that we're discussing this proves just what we've said about the drama of the competition, isn't it? And this is exactly what it's about, isn't it? We're not talking
this,
about times here. We're talking about winners.
yeah.
you know,
No,
Malcolm, I was in the US when Cole Hocker won the US Olympic trials. I happened to see it on NBC because I mean I never see the US trials, but I was in the States at the time and I saw the kick there. And I thought, I've not seen a guy kick off a reasonably fast pace like that. And that's why I thought going into the Olympics that Hocker had a realistic chance. And of course, I'm not claiming it, but it happened.
Yeah.
And I got the same vibe watching Laros close the other day in Brussels. So
yeah. Yeah, he has his kick, unlike Hawker's kick, always seems kind of anguished because of his form is
yes,
so
yeah.
weird. Whereas Laros's kick was like we were saying, was so effortless. I was like, Jesus, it just looked like he was waiting and waiting and waiting and then just said goodbye to everybody. It was really the other thing about Hawker is you could make a very strong case that in the two signature wins he's had in the Olympics and in the American Olympic trials. He's, in both cases, he's the beneficiary of some pretty stupid running by the other. Like if he wins the Olympics because they open the lane, they open the inside for him, right?
Mm.
Maybe he still wins if he has to go around, but I kind of think that that was Kerr's race, and Hawker got lucky because the inside opened up for him at the last moment. He was boxed, and I wonder a little bit about his tactically. I wonder a little bit about his ability to win in Tokyo. He was eating it lucky a third time in the U.S. Olympic trials. In the U.S. Championships, this thing, same thing happened. The inside opened up. He scoots through. Mm.
Mm, mm.
Malcolm, I'm interested to know. I mean, we all know it's a subject that we don't always like to talk about on this podcast, but doping is obviously an issue in sport, and we're covering athletics, and you have a passion for it. How do you handle, as somebody who's passionate about sport and particularly track and field, when you hear about doping cases and you know that there's potential issues? What is your mindset as a fan and as somebody that thinks about these things around how we deal
Mm.
with the doping issue?
I mean, I went through a little period years ago where I was sort of sanguine about doping. I'm no longer. I'm now a doping authoritarian, anti-doping authoritarian. Um, I think I think you should get a retroactive lifetime ban if you are found to have doped, which means that Nick Willis should have the gold medal from whatever it was. Um, every previous, if you are found guilty of a doping violation, every previous performance that you have in the sport of track and field should be erased from the books. And I think
Yeah.
that there should be no exceptions, and we should, so it should be absolutely clear what the consequences are. Um, now, but I'm more interested in that than I am in prospective bans. So I don't mind if you, like with Shelby Houlihan, I don't mind that she's back. I think you give this person a ban and you come back and you're under special scrutiny because you were a past offender, but you should be able to rejoin the sport. But everything she did prior to her violation should be gone, should be scrubbed.
Mhm.
And I think that would be what I've forgotten. So many people have been that those the in the Willis race, what was the race where he was originally fourth and he's now the silver medalist? I've forgotten.
Well, it would have been Ramsey would have won it, so that must be 8 or 12, 2008 or 12.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
Ramsey was the winner and Kiprop was second, right? So that was the two that he would have jumped up.
yeah, that's right. And he was third. I
Yeah.
think he's the gold medal winner. I think Willis, this is a
Um,
side. I have long felt he's the most underrated middle distance runner of his generation. I mean, he got cheated out of a gold, and if he wins that gold, then we think about him completely differently. And the only reason we don't think about him differently is that two guys ahead of him cheated. Like,
Mhm.
you know, and his level of consistency, this is one of my other thing. I think we always underrate long-term consistency as opposed, and overrate peak performance. To
mm.
have the career he did for as long as he did is an extraordinary accomplishment. Um, I think he ends up running doesn't he break John Walker's record for a number of sub 4 minute miles?
I think so, and I think this year was the first one that or last year rather, was the first year that he didn't do it since he was about 17, 18 years old, I reckon.
He's an astonishing performer. I mean, it really, and like in my mind, he's the gold medal winner.
Mm.
And why I once people got very angry once because I tweeted that I thought that Willis had, quote, twice the career of of the American who wins the gold medal in that preposterously slow race. Uh,
Centrovitz.
Cent-
Not Centrovitz. Yeah.
well, they're not even in this. They're not even. Centrowitz never breaks 3:30. How is Centrowitz and has one achievement, which is he outkicked people in a 3:45 uh, Olympic final. Like, how is he in the same conversation with Nick Willis? Right? They're not even. Whose career would you? I mean, absent the gold medal, but whose career would you rather have? I'd rather have Willis's career.
Yeah, it's a body of work. Yeah.
Yeah, body work.
Yeah. Um, on the doping, you said that you used to be sanguine about it, and now you described yourself as a authoritarian. What changed for you?
Because I mean, I think my earlier position, I was just being needlessly contrarian. Um, and I struggle a little bit with the logical problem of that we're fine with natural variation, extraordinary natural variation, but not fine with unnatural extraordinary variation. Um, like when I read this came up in this when I reviewed David Epstein's first book, The Sports Gene, and he talks about that famous, I think, Finnish or
Yeah. Yeah.
cross country skier who had naturally abnormally high amounts of hemoglobin. Was that right? He just
Yeah,
produced.
that's right. Yeah. Ira
Yeah,
Montaranti was the guy's name, I think.
that's right. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, so essentially his body naturally dopes, right? And I was like, and I was like, but then I realized that no, but that's what we're celebrating is natural variation. And you can have a sport where you permit unnatural variation, where you turn it into an arms race, a technology arms race, but that's not the sport we're talking about, right? You can do,
Yeah.
if you want to do an all-comers Olympics where people can dope all, you can have that, but the one we're dealing with, talking about right now, has these rules, and you know those rules when you sign up, and end of story. And that's the position. I realize there's no other way to enjoy the race, and also there's no other way if you turn it into a technological arms race, a wide open arms race, then you destroy the very thing that's beautiful about and distinctive about track and field, which is that it remains, to go to our earlier point, one of the few sports in the world that is truly open to everyone, right? Where the Kenyan
So,
can
so
compete.
where are you, where are you with super shoes then, and how they've affected the running times and performances of athletes? Are we all on the same level?
I'm on the same. I think we need to it's stupid. Get rid of them. There's no reason. In,
Has the horse
in
not
every other
bolted on that one?
the equipment is regulated. In golf, the equipment is regulated. In tennis, the equipment is you regulate the equipment. Why is this hard for us? Like, I just
Well, they have. I mean, they have. In theory, they have regulated it because there are rules governing the midsole stack of a shoe. So there are some regulations.
Yeah, but I think they've regulated it too loosely for it to not still be decisive. Because, and we've said this many times, if the shoe is worth 3 or 4% to one athlete but not another, then that means that if you randomize shoe allocation on the start line, you change the result, and that's not what I want to watch.
yeah, I
But
agree.
everybody has access to the shoes now.
No, but the thing is, like, that's theoretically, but they don't really. Because you got sponsor conflicts, you got issues like that, the availability of certain shoes to you, and you could, in theory, you could actually say we're all running in one shoe from now on, and you'd still get those differences. So
But
you're
no,
asking athletes to go shop around and optimize and tune their shoe foot tendon interaction. This is Formula One now.
yeah, no, it's not just access to the shoes. To your point, Ross, it is access to the shoes and the capacity to assess which shoe gives you the maximum advantage. It's that second
Exactly.
part, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
I don't want to turn this into tennis where you need to have $100,000 a year to compete meaningfully. Like that's the danger here. The beauty, I keep coming back to this. When I watch those races and I see somebody who grew up in a village an relatively undeveloped corner of a country, and someone like Josh Hoey, whose father is a multimillionaire, they are standing on the same race, competing under the same. That's beautiful, and it doesn't exist anywhere else,
Mm,
right? It doesn't.
mm,
There are no. You watch a uh, 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 a major golf tournament, the British Open. There there is no one on the first, on the roster of players who are signed up for that who came from a poor background. No, it just doesn't happen.
mm,
Right? You're looking at an economically selected group, right? I don't want that.
mm.
I don't want track to turn into that.
Yeah, that's the fear. And again, it interacts with what we were saying earlier about the drive to pick younger and younger and younger. So the two things interact with one another because now if you're not 12 or 13, you're not getting picked. You're not getting picked if you don't have super shoes. And so these two things are in lockstep driving this access issue. I think it's a massive problem. And
Yeah.
we won't know it. We just kind of have to get on and accept what we see. But
Yeah, I've seen it with my brother's children who are 13 running in super shoes at school level around the track, and I wonder how many of the children they're competing against will be able to afford those shoes, and therefore do they have an advantage at that level, and therefore what does that mean in the long term for them? So
They
again, it's
clearly,
right down to that bottom level, it's affecting sport.
they do definitely. And if the person
Mm.
making the pick isn't educated and aware, he will pick the performance, not the way that it was made, and then eventually that performance doesn't look so good anymore because everyone's normalized for shoes, and
Mm.
you've picked wrong, and your pick means you've excluded someone wrongly. So two losses. Every
Mm.
decision, two losses.
Yeah.
Just one thing back to the doping. You mentioned Houlihan, and that was a claimed contamination case. I reckon, be interesting to know, 80% of all doping positives get blamed on contamination.
Mm.
Do you think that we can be staunch anti-doping advocates and still back a proposal like Travis Tygart and USADA saying, let's make all drugs usable up to certain concentrations? There are problems with that, but it feels to me that something needs to be simplified or changed in the way anti-doping is done, because I worry that more innocent people are caught than guilty parties are, and it just doesn't seem like the cost benefit is worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know enough on that. I would be open to any way of rationalizing and simplifying. It does seem inordinately murky and convoluted the way we do it, but I don't have
Mm,
enough to.
I've got a
okay.
couple of quick questions for you just to round off my questions. So I'd like your thoughts on AI in sport. In other words, are we heading towards a world where AI dictates tactics, dictates the way that we play sport? And do you think it will have a profound effect on the games we play?
Uh, I don't know. That's a really interesting question.
Even if it's just amusing, you can give us your
Yeah.
opinion.
Well,
Not
in
based on any
sports,
fact, just Malcolm Gladwell's opinion on this.
American football would be an example of a sport where I would imagine it would have huge impact because that's a sport where you're making data-rich decisions uh, in many cases very quickly and repeatedly over the course of an entire match. Um, so being able to employ AI as a kind of decision-making aid is going to be, I'm sure it's already happening. Um, where you have the potential of calling any number of 100 plays or 1,000 plays. Um, uh, but that's a very peculiarly structured sport. In other sports, I imagine it just would be a training aid, a way of, I mean, I've noted the way that Strava has a very, very, very mild AI function now, which comments on my runs. That could get very sophisticated, right? And I imagine it will. And I imagine that, I would imagine that in most of these cases, the benefit of AI is it extends expertise to areas where previously there was no expertise. It's of lesser benefit to areas where there was expertise. So it doesn't help, it's going to help me more than it helps Josh Kerr, right? That's going to help
Mm.
the aging mediocre weekend warrior a lot. If they could run all my numbers, and I'll take all of my physiological data and say, this would be really useful. Right now it gives me an incredibly lame suggestion about what my daily workout should be. It could be really sophisticated, right? It could say you need to do 10 times 400 and with 100-meter jog in this time band. Um, that's where I think it's going to it'll be the most kind of useful and fun.
The reason why I find it interesting is that for instance, on Zwift, which is the indoor cycling platform, you have these things called robo pacers. And I fundamentally have a problem with the fact that the robo pacer is a image of a robot. Now that sounds silly to suggest, well, of course it's a robot because it's a virtual thing. When in the old days they used to have a person that looked like a person, even though it was a virtual person. And it took the humanity away from the idea of a pacer. So I guess the question is, does AI threaten the humanity of sport and how that we play it? Because once you take away the emotional decision making of humans, you take away from the essence of what sport's really about.
Yeah. Do know. I mean, it's one of those questions that applies to every realm in which AI is entering, or whether does
Mm,
AI replace or assist in decision making. And at least in the first wave, I think it will be assisting. But I don't know. The question is, I mean, with sport, at least, our motivations for playing and watching are not about maximizing efficiency. It's not like business. So I would
mm,
imagine that sport would be, what we're going to continue to want to see this as a very human activity, and that's what's going to give sports its its cultural appeal.
mm,
Mm.
mm,
My personal view is it will put a premium on human interactions.
mm,
Like away from sport, you can make music on AI within a minute. You can tell AI make me a song that blends the elements of my five favorite bands. These are them, and it'll produce something new, but it's not real. There's no person behind it, so I don't
mm,
think there's an emotional affinity that exists. And sport is about that as well. So I think it's not immune, and it'll be used as a tool. But I think people will gravitate more and more towards human interaction and contact.
mm,
And the people who can maybe use the tool the best, but still remain involved with human connection will thrive under AI. Everyone else is just producing slop and rubbish, I think.
Mhm.
yeah, I hope you're right. And my final question, where do you, I mean, we've asked this amongst ourselves here on the podcast, and we've asked a couple of guests to comment on this as well, but where do you see sport in 2075, 50 years away from here? Where do you think we're heading in terms of how we engage and play sport?
Oh, wow.
Just a
Um,
quick one to leave you with.
Just an easy one to leave you with, yeah.
well, are we talking about mass sport, or are we talking about elite sport? I mean, I do think that they used to be exist on a continuum, and I think increasingly they will become disconnected. And like I said, that is a trend that I don't like. Um, but I think that's probably inevitable. I ran in the little town I live. They had a 1 mile race down Main Street. It's very clever because it's a hill. We all ran down the hill, so we all had the benefit of a time that was exceedingly generous. And and I was struck by like what a beautiful community. It's like a whole bunch of people, 100 and it's a tiny town, but like I don't know how many hundreds of people showed up, and there were the elites who ran, close to 4 minutes, and then there was the 70-year-old guy who ran, 12 minutes, whatever. And it was it was to me was what sports that's what sports is supposed to be. And the idea that we all did it under one part of what was beautiful was that it was that mix. The really good guys were there with the slow people. Um, uh, and that, my hope is that people will continue to recognize that that's what's beautiful and protect it. So if we can still have that in 2075, um, I'll be very happy. What I don't want is
Mm.
a world like with tennis. I brought it up before, but the pickleball, the rise of pickleball is um, a response to the fact that the original game of tennis has been so professionalized that it no longer has a function for the average, relatively mediocre player in their 50s and 60s. Right? If you're insisting that everyone hit with power and with massive topspin, then what if the notion of the person who used to play this very gentle game into their 70s is it's over. That's not what the kid moving up now is. That's not the game they learned. So we have to come up with a new game which allows someone to play gracefully into middle age, right? There's something heartbreaking about that. I always go running past
So
this campus,
true.
and I see these two old guys who must be in their 80s, and they're playing traditional flat strokes, beautiful stroke, and neither of them move. They sit there and they hit the ball back perfectly to each other for like ever. It's gorgeous. Like that's a function of the way they were taught to play tennis and the nature of the tennis they learned in the 50s and 60s. right? The tennis is gone.
Yeah, that's
Because what pickleball's doing for tennis in the US is the same as paddle's doing here, and it's exactly the same thing. It's just accessible, and anyone can play it at a level that's enjoyable. Tennis is no longer like that. If you haven't trained and learned how to play structured tennis, playing tennis for an hour is a complete waste of your time.
Yeah.
And so it's a difficult one. You mentioned at the start COVID, the madness of COVID, and those 2.5 years. I think one upside, certainly here in South Africa, of COVID is that when the lockdowns ended, so many people just wanted to get outside and exercise. I think there are more people, certainly in Cape Town, and I want to know if you've seen similar. More people are now embracing the idea of exercising recreationally than they did before COVID. Maybe it's my own bias, but I think that that's one of the positive things that came out of that was an appreciation for exercise and health.
Yeah, running in New York City, I know running clubs have exploded. And literally, yeah, I think I think I actually agree with that. I think there was a that it was a kind of new appreciation of exercise, that kind of organized exercise.
Yeah,
I'm
because
just
we've got the mountain up here that people go walk the trails on, and for the first 6 months after COVID, you couldn't park within 4 kilometers of the mountain. You'd park, walk 4Ks to do the walk, and then walk 4K back to the car to go home. And that people were doing it. Remember, it was absolutely wild. And bikes, everyone was out. So I hope that continues. My last question is just Tokyo's coming up, World Champs. You've already told us what your favorite event is going to be. Give us two others. Give the listeners two other events to watch in Tokyo.
men's
You look-
5K. I'm a Grant Fisher believer. I feel like he just I think he can kick hard off a fast pace. And I think what's happened is he keeps getting second and third because he's kicking hard off a slower pace, or anyway, I would like to see, I'm very, very interested to see whether he can win the 5K. I would love to see that. I think he's ready for women's 800. The Hodgkinson thing is, I feel I can't quell my suspicions about her. It seems too, how do you do what she does? She's either the greatest, she might be the greatest half miler for generation. We may be witnessing something extraordinary here, but she just has so much talent that she can disappear and then just come back and be fantastic again. So I'm very curious to see that, how that race. I'm sad about one of my favorite runner for years was Laura Muir, and she's now, I think, at the tail end of her career. So she's no longer. I'm sort of sad that she won't be likely be in medal contention. But I thought no one ran with more guts than her. I just thought she was electric. But anyway, those are the three races I'm most. Well, it also seems like, since I am half Jamaican, there seems like there's a emerging generation of a new generation of Jamaican sprinters, which fills me with any kind of narrative of Jamaican dominance makes me.
Very good.
Malcolm Gladwell, thanks very much for your time.
Yes, this is really, really fun. Good. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Science of Sport podcast